Welcome to Film Strip. These podcasts are spoiler-filled as we discuss the plots, characters, and themes of the films in review. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504(c)(2), Title 17.
Welcome to Film Strip. I'm Jay.
And I'm Kurt.
This is our review of The Shining, starring Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall, Danny Lloyd, and Scatman Crothers. Co-written, produced, and directed by Stanley Kubrick based on the hit Stephen King novel. Released in 1980 on a budget of $19 million, grossed over $44 million at the box office. So we're continuing our reviews with the films of Stanley Kubrick, and as I stated on previous shows, this is now my third time reviewing this for a podcast. Beyond that, though, I've seen this movie countless times, Kurt. Like, this one goes all the way back to when I was really too young to see it. My dad loved this movie, let me watch it. All of it, and I mean all of it. And, of course, it freaked me completely out. One of the few films that I can actually say I was legitimately scared by as a kid. So I didn't watch it for a few years, but then as I got a little older, Dad and I had a ritual in December to watch this because of cold weather and such, even though we never got anything near this kind of snow. We just dreamed of it. But it was kind of a winter movie. Like, some people watch, A Christmas Carol, which we do that, or, I don't know, How the Grinch Stole Christmas. My dad and I for years watched The Shining, which I know is kind of twisted, but it's just one of our things. And, years later, I even read the book. And when the TV miniseries came out again in 97, I taped that on VHS and sadly taped over it many years later with probably some WCW Nitro or something, because that's way more entertaining than that miniseries. But I mean, I've seen The Shining so many times, and the truth is, though, this had been the first time I had watched it again since the last podcast I did of it, which was like in 2015 or something. So it was good to go back and revisit an old friend here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we finally come to it. The Shining is the first Kubrick movie I ever saw. That's probably the case with a lot of people. And this is the one I've seen the most. I first saw this movie in probably a made, safe for television version, probably somewhere between 8 and 10. And looking back, as I was thinking about that, I was like, I'm not sure what the purpose of a made-for-TV version of this movie would be, because I don't know what you'd be allowed to show back then on cable. Yeah. But not long after that, my parents, who were big fans of this movie, they gathered the whole family together and we watched the DVD. Now, before this, the first bit I'd ever seen of this movie was on The Simpsons during that Halloween segment called The Shinning. And I'm a big Simpsons buff, at least during that first decade of the show. And in my opinion, the 6 minutes they did parodying The Shining is the best 6 minutes they ever did. I didn't know it yet, but it was and is a pitch perfect parody of Kubrick. Like, clearly, like, those guys, they're not just making fun of it. Like, they're fans showing how cool it is, while at the same time making fun of stuff like, usually the blood gets off on the second floor. But anyway, I saw this movie when I was too young for it, definitely, and it scared the hell out of me. But I loved it, and it's become a favorite, ever since, and a family favorite too, like movies like Fargo or Goodfellas. And this seems to be the most accessible movie Kubrick has made, and probably the most watched. Like, this is the only Kubrick movie out there that possibly that my mom has seen at all. And, she's seen this multiple times. Huge fan. An audience in 1980 apparently weren't as receptive. It still holds a middling Metacritic rating, just probably based on reviews from back then. And I probably attribute that to the book was huge back then, and this movie differs from that a lot. And the big thing is, nobody had ever seen, never mind horror movie, no one had ever seen a movie like this, ever. But now it's regarded as one of, if not, depending on who you ask, one of the best horror movie ever made.
Oh, yeah. I think it's funny that this one has become such a beloved film, and it made a lot of money. I mean, at the time, Kubrick needed to hit, and he knew it. Barry Lyndon did not work. Clockwork Orange had been critically acclaimed, and it made a little money, but it was not a massive hit. The thing was, he was still reeling from the fact that he did 2001. That was this massive event, and he could do anything he wanted, and what he wanted to do was Napoleon, and he couldn't do that, and it haunted him for the rest of his life. And so he was looking for something to do, and turning pulp horror novels into movies seemed to be something people would throw money at him to do. So he apparently locked himself in his office, and his secretary talks about how she would hear thuds on the wall of when he would start reading books, wouldn't be into it, chuck it. And then she didn't hear a noise for a while, went and checked on him, and he was like buried into The Shining. And having read that book a couple of times, I can understand that. And I should say from the outset, the book is a completely different experience than this. Like, this is very much like what Kubrick does when he adapts things, but unlike maybe A Clockwork Orange, where it's pretty much page to screen for the most part, this one is, well, here's sort of the spirit of what you're going for, but I have a much better idea, Stephen. And King has gone back and forth through the years. I think his real feeling about it is that he absolutely hated this and didn't want to be a part of it, and was pissed off that his script got rejected and all that kind of stuff. And that's why we got that TV miniseries, which is much more akin to what the book's supposed to be. And outside of one casting choice, is completely and totally horrible, and doesn't work at all. Whereas this movie is, at this point, we're recording this, Kurt, it's 39 years old, it's almost 40 years old, and it still holds up. Like, you don't even think about the tech in it or anything like that, where you watch that 97 one and it's like, ooh, hedge animals, bad, CGI, bad.
Oh, yeah, and I tend not to take much stock in what Stephen King has to say about his own movies. I mean, he's always said he hates The Shining, but, this is the guy who thought Maximum Overdrive was great, and to the point of in the trailer.
Yeah.
If anyone hasn't seen the trailer, look up the trailer for Maximum Overdrive. It's the only time a director's, well, not the only time, but he thinks he's Hitchcock or something, where he can make a trailer where he's looking right in the camera, which Hitchcock's great at, but Stephen King's got the cross eyes going.
The difference is Hitchcock was never loped out on cocaine and cough syrup when he was shooting a movie. And Stephen King definitely was shooting Maximum Overdrive like that. You go back and listen to the archives, folks. Go to the Filmstrip archives, search Maximum Overdrive. Nick and I reviewed that way back when. And when the first time I reviewed The Shining, same series when we were doing Stephen King adaptations. Yeah, King is definitely not the best source of his own stuff. I think it's funny that you mentioned that this one didn't have a lot of critical acclaim. This was a Razzie-nominated performance by Shelley Duvall and Razzie-nominated director, though the Screen Actors Guild nominated him for Best Director, so go figure.
Oh, yeah, it's, I think pretty much everyone, I think this is like a pretty universal movie across the board. I've never heard anyone say they don't like this movie. But I think, again, like I said, I think it's just a thing of, in 1980, I mean, I can't think of any, I haven't seen every horror movie ever made, but I can't think of any horror movie like this, where it is so, I mean, it's a 2.5-hour movie, and lots of it is very slow. A lot of it completely, is not a horror movie. It turns into some kind of a weird, I don't know, time travel comedy, whatever you want to call it, where all of a sudden it's the 1920s, and might be, I can totally see audiences being, like, they're just not used to it. It's like, it's probably similar to, like, movies I talked about in the last pod about, movies like Blade Runner. No one had ever seen a movie like that, or some, maybe a totally different kind of movie, but like The Thin Red Line. And you can say that about every Kubrick movie. You look up the reviews, almost all of them, except for Dr. Strangelove. All the movies made after Dr. Strangelove were all very, very lukewarm, because critics just didn't know what to make of it. And it's like that saying I hear, pioneers are the ones that leave with arrows in their back. And like, right. You can say that about Kubrick, because he was creating the form. Like, he told Spielberg, like, I want to change the form. He was going out of his way to change the form, and of course, to do that, it involves confusing a lot of people initially. But now everyone looks at those movies and says he's a genius. But that Razzie nomination always makes me chuckle every time I see that.
I wonder sometimes if, like, that's just not people having fun with him, because of all of Kubrick's things, for those who were close to him, apparently he had a real sense of humor and was real warm. Like, as much of a jerk or maybe a taskmaster as he could be to his actors and things like that, and as much of a perfectionist as he was and putting something together, apparently if you were close to him, the guy was a real funny guy, and like, you got a good laugh out of him, but he was also a genius, and he didn't know he was a genius, so he's the best kind, because he's just trying to reinvent things, but he's pushing himself forward, and he's inventing camera lenses, he's doing stuff, and we'll talk about a lot of that with this. Again, John Alcott's doing cinematography here, and it's friggin' gorgeous. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. I missed an opportunity, Kurt, a few years ago. My wife's cousins worked at movie theaters for years while they were in high school and college and stuff, and they would like close out theaters late at night for screenings and stuff, and I was one day late getting into town. They were screening The Shining on like a big screen. I miss seeing it on a big screen. Someday, I know they're coming out with another 4K restoration. I'm hoping it makes another theatrical run. I want to see this on a big screen at some point because I've seen it on my televisions and all that kind of stuff, but I want to see this in a theater and experience that with a crowd of people because I can only imagine what it was like at the time.
Whenever I think of horror movies, I tend to think of something a little bit more claustrophobic, like the year before this movie comes out is Alien, all about claustrophobia and smoke and flashing lights, whereas this movie is very open, very like this. So many of the shots are these huge, epic wide shots, like the complete opposite of claustrophobia.
And let's talk about what was happening at this moment. This movie came out 2 years after Halloween came out, the same year as Friday the 13th came out. The slasher craze was starting, but it should be noted this movie was shooting while Halloween was coming out and building its buzz. So the book came out in 77. They shot this thing for an entire year in 78. Kubrick spent most of 79 putting it together. Tom Cruise joked years later that in between breaks on Eyes Wide Shut, Stanley would go into his trailer and start recutting The Shining. So he was never done with it. I mean, this was the thing that he sort of abandoned. I remember hearing a record producer once say that great albums are never finished, they're abandoned at some point by the band, is because you have to get it to the public, and this one was like right up until the day of, and he was still recutting it and throwing it back in theaters. This was back in a time too when movies would stay in theaters for a very long time. We didn't have home video yet, and so it lent it to itself. But this was a real change of pace from everything else that was going on in the horror genre. And as somebody who's a big horror person or horror buff, I realize how different this is to do a almost 50s and 60s style haunted house movie in the midst of the slash and cut 'em up craze.
I don't know if this is the right word, but like this movie, this is Kubrick selling out. I don't mean that in a bad way, but this is him like trying to cash in of like, horror movies are big. So like this book is big. I'll make a movie out of that. But even with him quote unquote, selling out or, trying to make a populist movie, his version of a populist movie is a movie with the most amount of blood you've ever seen in one shot in the history of film. Yeah. Rushing out of an elevator and splashing across the walls.
It's also one of those movies that is full of so many things that people have picked it apart forever. Have you ever seen the documentary Room 237? It ran around Hulu and Netflix for a long time.
Not yet.
Oh, you need to check it at least once. It is definitely like going deep into the rabbit hole. All right, with a lot of stuff. And some of it, like, I can get caught up in it and like, holy cow, and I'll start thinking about it. I'm like, wait a minute, this guy shot this for a year. They were making this up as they went along. This is something that should be noted. Like this one in particular, they were writing the script day at a time. Nicholson just got to the point where people would hand him the script and he would just throw it in the trash and be like, whatever, I'll just have to learn it 5 minutes before I shoot it anyway. Because Stanley and Diane Johnson, his co-writer on this one, who was like a New York Times columnist and stuff like that, really just continually wrote and rewrote. And they built these elaborate sets. Only Stanley Kubrick would shoot the outside of a hotel, then go rebuild the inside of it because it didn't work the way he wanted to. So, but there's all this stuff where people are like, the layouts of the rooms make no sense. I'm like, yeah, no shit. He had to make it up as he was going along. Like he invented something that didn't exist, and it didn't even exist in the book. And that's what's the amazing part is that he took, and if you've read the book, King does a great job of describing the scenery of this hotel and what it looks like. I mean, he even stayed in what the Stanley Hotel that inspired what the Overlook was in the book. And you get this great, rich language from King on what it looks like. And Kubrick took that and just took it to the next degree. And the fact that he did all of that, and again, it's such a gonzo production. It's just, we're just making it up as we go along. I'm torturing the actors because I want them to seem distressed. He gets Shelley Duvall so mad her hair starts falling out at some point. I mean, again, the woman a poor nervous breakdown. I'm like, man, what a nut. I mean, to dig in on everything that the guy digs in on. And this movie's about craziness. And then for years later, again, to come back to 237, people to take all of it and just extrapolate into these wild theories about what this means and what it doesn't mean. And I can only imagine like Kubrick's estate sort of chuckles at some of that, and he might even find some of it amusing. And he even said like he made it to be a little open-ended, but in his mind, there's a straight through line to what he was trying to tell here. And if people want to read beyond that, well, that's up to them.
Oh yeah, and to go back on what you're saying about him making up as you go, it's like there's literal proof of that, and that's in this on the DVD or Blu-ray. I think it's his daughter Vivian Kubrick shot this 20-minute documentary making of the movie. It is one of the very few, or maybe the only, inside look of Kubrick. There's actually some footage of like this for Full Metal Jacket, but a lot of it apparently is lost. But it's this amazing documentary of up close and personal with Jack Nicholson, who despite how crazy he is, this movie couldn't possibly seem more easygoing, have a great sense of humor. And there's a bit where Shelley Duvall is having a nervous breakdown. She's literally in the corner, lying down with either maybe her assistant, like who's like rubbing her hands, and in the same shot we move off of her, and Kubrick, he's not talking to her at all. He is typing up versions of the script, so he was making it up.
Yeah, I mean, he was doing this as he went along because as he got into it, he cast Nicholson for this because he'd been wanting to work with Nicholson for a long time. Nicholson was going to do Napoleon with him, and that didn't work out. Nicholson went away, did some other stuff, and you have to put out of your mind what you think of Jack Nicholson now. All right. Matter of fact, I think a lot of what we think of Jack Nicholson now kind of started with this performance, and then he's just repeated it for 40 years almost now. But Nicholson at this point was somebody who was a really acclaimed actor, and for good reason. The man is an incredible performer, and he's known to be very fun and very laid back, and even he was getting stressed out by all of this. And he was living with Angelica Houston at the time in London and her sister, and they would talk about the grueling days he would put in on the set, and then would come back and just be completely and totally wiped out. He's like, I don't even know what we're doing anymore. He's like, I don't know what the story is. And that's the amazing thing, is that really your three central performers here that he was able to assemble out of all of those hours of film, the performances he got out of them. And I gotta say now, Danny Lloyd is probably the greatest horror actor kid in a horror movie, maybe of all time. I mean, a lot of times, they don't tell kids they're in horror movies and what they're doing or whatever. And apparently he had no idea what he was in. The Kubrick kept him totally in the dark. He just went off of it, and they went through some sort of wicked elaborate way to find him. It's like looking for Anakin Skywalker in Phantom Menace for George Lucas, except with much better results. No offense, Jake Lloyd. But Danny Lloyd, no relation, by the way. Danny Lloyd gives such a cool performance as this creepy telepathic kid, right? And the fact that it all came together is an amazing bit of editing by Ray Lovejoy and Kubrick and his team to put this together. But it was also at a time when you could take a year and a half to put something like this together, and people weren't beating down your door. Disney wasn't trying to murder you to get the print, and put it in theaters. So we don't live in that time anymore. I don't think people get that kind of time to do stuff like this, and maybe we don't have those filmmakers. Before we get into it, though, we got to talk about one more thing that's more modern. Spielberg, it was really close with Kubrick, and he decided to make part of Ready Player One a replay of a pretty significant scene in The Shining, and that's very different from the Ready Player One book. And I remember seeing that in theaters, and I people hated that. I loved it. I thought it was a really fun sort of in-world game experience if you could relive part of The Shining, what that would look like. And the way they put it together, it looked amazing. And it's the only bit of The Shining I've ever seen on a big screen again, so it really whet the appetite to see it again. But I thought that was cool. What did you think of it?
Oh yeah, I was a big, I'm a big fan of Ready Player One, and I was all set for that movie for all these, these various science fiction things that were going to meld in, Iron Giant, Back to the Future, and, King Kong type stuff. And then out of nowhere, they say we're going to go into the movie The Shining. I'm like, wait, what? And then I think it was Simon Pegg's character says, everyone be careful, he says, I hope you have the belly for it. And it's like, a line Grady says in The Shining, and then the music starts, and then, we go into that scene, and I was not to oversell it too much, but that was like a magical moment for me, because I was not thinking we're going to get that Steven Spielberg was going to do the best Kubrick tribute, anyone's done, in a decade since, There Will Be Blood, because and watching that scene, I still can't tell if he recreated that set or if it's CGI or if he's putting CGI characters in that scene. but it was so well done, and I just had the biggest smile on my face during that entire scene. My only regret is they didn't somehow work in Jack Nicholson and have someone say, here's Johnny. That confused me. But other than that, that was such a joy. Because Spielberg is one of, Kubrick's best pals. So Spielberg, he's the best guy to do something like that. He was having a good time with that part.
Being pals with Kubrick, he was able to get it. But I'm glad you enjoyed that too. Maybe one day we'll get around to talking about that movie because I think it is worth another look. But it was worth talking about here because that maybe for our younger listeners or younger audience, that may be what you know of The Shining. That here's Johnny line, and then you saw it, parodied or put it together on The Simpsons, and then in Ready Player One. You may not know it for itself. So it is an older film, like all of these have been up to this point. But this one is I do feel like everybody's seen a piece of it or has some connection to it. And I've always been amazed at how can you summarize such a thing, right? And I even went back and listened to my old plot summary, and Nick and I joked about how long it was because we've really shortened them down. At your suggestion, by the way, Kurt, people don't know Kurt's the reason we shortened the plot summaries years ago on this show because they were going on way long. And then I want y'all to know, I wrote a 2-paragraph summary, and Kurt was like, no, I got this, and turned in this treatise that he's about to go through here. So I just want y'all to know that the guy who said do shorter plot summaries is about to drop a long one on you. So, but that's okay. Well, Kurt, I think it is time to give a plot summary. So tell people about Stanley Kubrick's The Shining.
Well, unemployed writer and recovering alcoholic Jack Torrance takes a job as a caretaker for the Overlook Hotel in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado during the winter season and brings along his wife Wendy and son Danny. Before going to the Overlook, Danny has visions of blood and death that he discusses with Tony, the boy who lives in his mouth. Danny Torrance at the hotel meets Dick Halloran, who's the head chef of the Overlook Hotel, who tells Danny he has an ability that he calls shining, which is ESP, or telepathy. And he tells Danny in so many words that the Overlook Hotel is haunted. And a month into the winter season, as the snow starts to fall, and Jack starts working on his new novel, Danny begins to see ghosts in the halls of the Overlook and is attacked by one of them in room 237. Jack has visions of his own, visions of death in a horrible dream that he explains to Wendy that he dreamt of killing her and Danny. At which point Danny comes in with bruises and Wendy accuses Jack of hurting him. Puzzled by this, Jack heads to the Overlook bar to gather his thoughts, where he meets Lloyd, the bartender, who listens to Jack's tales of woe and pours him a drink. Wendy comes over in hysterics, saying Danny claims he was strangled by an old woman in the hotel in room 237. Jack investigates, and sure enough, he finds an old woman, but he keeps that to himself and returns to the bar. This time he runs into a waiter claiming to be Delbert Grady, who was a previous caretaker of the Overlook who murdered his family during his stay. Grady tells Jack that Danny is using his psychic abilities to bring Dick Halloran to the Overlook and that he needs to act fast to correct the situation. Wendy discovers Jack's writings, which is the same sentence repeated across hundreds of pages. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. At which point Jack comes in and threatens her, but Wendy gets the drop on him, knocking him out with a baseball bat, locking him in the kitchen pantry. Grady then comes to Jack's aid, telling him he'll have to act even faster, releases him from the pantry, and convinces him to butcher his family. Danny, through Tony, warns Wendy of this coming attack by writing red rum on a door in her bedroom and repeating it over and over again, which when Wendy sees it in a mirror spells murder. Jack then hacks into Wendy's room with an axe as she gets Danny out the window. Dick Halloran arrives after Danny's psychic call, and Jack takes a break from trying to kill his own wife for a minute to kill Halloran, and then goes after Danny, who leads Jack into the Overlook's hedge maze. As Wendy tries to get outside, she begins to see many of these same visions Jack and Danny have been seeing. Danny manages to lose Jack in the maze and escape with Wendy via the all-terrain vehicle that Halloran came in. We then cut to the next morning where Jack has frozen to death in the maze, and then we cut to the hotel lobby to find a photograph of Jack at a 4th of July party dated July 1921. And we cut to black.
And we get the old song in the background to go with it, and we're left with a million questions, and 2 hours and 20-something minutes later, if you're not freaked out of your head and thoroughly confused, then you've slept through the movie. Because that's the only way you could react to this the first time. I mean, even as a kid, I don't know that I absorbed all of that. It took me several viewings to get it. And I'll be honest with you, Kurt, I don't know that I've totally got it. I've got a lot of questions. And I'm really curious just to have that dialogue with you about who is this? What is this? How did this work? Because that's the beauty of this film for me, is that it is one of the very few films I can think of where you walk out of it and you want to have a conversation with someone about what you just saw. And I remember one of the first times I watched this with my wife, who had seen it before but didn't really have any memory of it. We watched it one winter together, and the whole time we're back and forth talking through it, and we sat on the couch as the credits were playing, just having this whole little mini film strip about what was that and what did this mean. And so I think that's one of the fun things about this movie. And you can look at it from the character's point of view. You can talk about the through line of the story. You can talk about the freaky stuff that goes down. There's just so many ways to attack this one.
Oh yeah, that's one of the reasons I think it is maybe Kubrick's most accessible film, even more so than Dr. Strangelove, which is only 90 minutes long and a comedy, is that it does have a pretty complex plot, a lot of threads to delve into. But I think one reason it's so easy to watch is that at the end of the day, it is a very, very basic story with basically 4 characters, 6 if you count the couple ghosts he talks to, and it's just about. And one of the things that makes this movie so kind of primally disturbing is it's about a father trying to kill his own family. Because there's plenty of slasher movies where it's some guy out of the loony bin, some guy out of jail, some guy possessed. And this is just, this is a movie that poses a what if question. It's like, what would you do if your dad came at you with an axe? And I think that is so disturbing. One of the guys involved in the production of the DVD says, real horror is not monsters and, aliens and demons. It's like horror is across the dinner table. It's like right. when you can get close to home and touch someone where they live in that way. That's how you scare an audience, and that's what Kubrick did here. Well, I mean, and that's exactly what films like Halloween and Alien thrive off of. Even Alien being a futuristic movie is really a haunted house movie in space. What if this thing got in there and you couldn't do anything about it? Halloween is the guy next door murders his sister as a kid, goes away and escapes from the loony bin and just comes back and starts doing it again. Before they get convoluted and all the other things that series did and then threw away and, redid or whatever. It was just about a guy, and he was just a normal guy. There wasn't anything real. As a matter of fact, it was just a PA walking around with a mask on and just he walked with a glide, and Carpenter was like, yeah, I like you. It was Nick Castle, the director. And Castle was like, I just walk. I don't really do it. But it was just all embodied that, right? And that's the thing here. And what we should say, too, in the book, the story is very much written from Stephen King trying to deal with his alcoholism at the time. And it was a battle that he would fight for many decades. But this was one of the first times he really tried to get himself clean after the success of Carrie and a lot of other things. And he had violent outbursts with his family and with his son Owen, and he didn't hurt him necessarily, but he thought about it, and he got caught up. And King's one of those people that if he ever has the thought about something, he's not going to let it go. He's going to write a billion words about it. And so he just poured it into this idea of like, what about this man that breaks, and what if we introduce telepathy and ghosts and all this other stuff going on? But the book is very much about the family drama sort of falling apart, and this movie is about that, but it's also about a lot of other stuff too. And it's really about this haunting, and it's a lot about Danny. And at this time watching it, I purposely tried to watch this from the Danny character's point of view and just try to filter everything through his eyes, what he's experiencing, what he's seeing. And it gives you a different perspective on it. So I encourage somebody to do that if you really like this movie and want to revisit it. So I guess we should start talking about the characters. And Jack, we've talked about Nicholson and how an amazing performer he is. I'm going to say something, though. I don't even think this is his very best performance that he's ever given. I can name a few more that I think he's better in, but I don't think he's wrong in this role. The thing about him that I think is different from the Jack Torrance in the book is Jack Torrance in the book is somebody who's trying to get it together, kind of has it together, and then just unravels. In this book, this movie, this Jack kind of always looks like he's kind of already cracked up, and the super glue is just not going to hold very long. Oh yeah, I've heard that. I've heard some people that were trying, that are, even they like the movie, they really don't like Jack's performance, and I can see what they're saying, because Jack Nicholson, I especially see what people saying that in 1980, because this is Jack Nicholson really at his peak. One of, if not the greatest actor of all time, coming off of the 70s, where he set a new standard for screen acting, Chinatown, Five Easy Pieces, Cuckoo's Nest. And the last detail, I've heard it said, Nicholson was a great actor, and then after he did the Warren Beatty movie Reds, suddenly he went away and he came back as Jack Nicholson, where he basically played a certain type for the rest of his career, which may be true in, varying roles of varying success. But at this point, Nicholson was a lot more flexible. He had a lot more range, because the thing is, he never played a character like this before or since. Even going appropriately over the top as the Joker in Batman, he's still not as manic as he is in this movie. When you throw a dart, you'll hit a moment where he is over the top. A random example, when he kills Halloran, after he hits him with the axe, he comes up into frame. He's just making this extreme gurning grin face, holding it in front of the camera for a good 15 seconds. It's one of those things where I'm in the movie, but, I've seen it so many times, I try to think of, God, what was going through his head? He's like, I'm just standing here making this face for like a good 15 seconds. And he's never done that again. But I'm not saying it's a bad performance. I think it's quite the opposite. It might be the best over-the-top performance I've seen in any movie. The next one that comes to mind is similar, is Daniel Day-Lewis in that last 20 minutes of There Will Be Blood. I think it takes a great actor to go over the top and yet still be incredibly watchable. Because one thing about Nicholson is, love him or hate him, you can't take I wouldn't say it's a laughable performance, but like no matter what, you can't take your eyes off of this guy.
No, you can't. And that's the thing I will say about him is he instantly brings you in every scene he's in, whether he's playing it low and he's laying in bed eating bacon going, I love it here. I fell in love with this place. I've had deja vu at places, but this was crazy. And he's doing that, or later on he's being creepy with his kid, like, would you like to stay here forever? Or he's just howling like a crazy person with an axe out in the snow and whatever it might be. Or even better, one of the best scenes, honestly, is when he's with that Grady character in the bathroom and he's going like, oh, yeah, you killed your family. And you did it with a smile. He's doing a lot of Joker stuff, and I'm going, holy cow, man. It's neat to watch an actor with that kind of control. And also when you plug into the fact that, like, he probably had to do that 48 times in a row, and he's going, what else can I do? Possibly. And then to realize what we see is a splice of those 48 performances. It's unbelievable. If this was a play that had gotten rehearsed and filmed, they'd never be able to recreate it. If it was a band putting an album together, there's no way you'd ever be able to play it live because you don't know what version of it got in there. It's weird to see, but he puts on a performance. I think, like, for me, like Cuckoo's Nest and Chinatown are classic performances. They're hard to ever beat for him. I've also thought another one in the 80s. It's kind of an underrated. He won an Oscar for it, though. He's awesome in Terms of Endearment, which is a total schlock movie, but he's great in it. And a total cheese fest Lifetime movie, but he's really good in it. And it kind of a role he got to replay several years in his career down the line. And he's good. And so he's great in A Few Good Men. There's a menace to that Colonel as well.
Oh, yeah.
And that really comes out in the courtroom scene and stuff like that. So Jack plays a lot of the same stuff, and you see some of it here, and I think that's fun to watch when you get an actor with such a wide career and you see him do stuff. But what's funny is, for years you watch the Showtime Lakers and he's sitting courtside. He makes some of the same Shining faces. It was kind of scary.
Oh, yeah. And you say, like, what? I think Nicholson's performance is the poster child for that thing Kubrick did of doing the same scene, 40, 50, 60 times in a row. But that's what he did. I think it's Sidney Pollack, who was in Eyes Wide Shut, he said, it's like the same thing, did like 80 takes of a scene. And Kubrick said he was very, very calm. He's like, it's not like he was screwing up. He's like, you spend all these millions of dollars building a set, doing the lighting, you do years to get to this point. And then, you do 2 takes and you say that's good enough. And it's like, he was all about, like, if we're going to get it, I want to make sure that I have every single take I could possibly want in that editing room. It's like, as long as we're here, let's get it done. It's like what was it? Like, there's a little bit of Guillermo del Toro shooting Hellboy, and a guy was trying, I guess he seemed like he was rushing. And the guy said, hey, look, man, like, you do great. If you do great, we're going to be here 12 hours. If you do bad, we're going to be here 12 hours. So just relax, take it easy.
Right. Yeah, we're here no matter what. So.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And Nicholson in this movie, although as a huge Nicholson fan, And I'm such a huge, I'm like I said, I'm a huge fan of him either side of, this movie. I love him in, The Departed, About Schmidt, A Few Good Men, whatever. And then his early stuff, in Chinatown and, Five Easy Pieces, this very sort of, a kind of intensity that, he almost invented. I'm watching this movie, and I haven't read the book, The Shining, but from what I understand, like you said, the character is meant to start off much more relatable and like someone that you would know. Whereas in this movie, it does seem like he's a little cracked from the jump. And I wonder I think Nicholson absolutely, I'll bet you he did play every scene, those first couple takes, as something that would have fit right in Five Easy Pieces. He probably played it as a completely realistic husband and father, probably, realistic take on alcoholism. But he said Kubrick told him, real is good, interesting is better. So he said there was like the editor or someone said the process was those first couple takes, Nicholson was great. And then you get to take 12, he would start to get tired. Almost like, it's like, he starts going through the motions. And then you start getting into take 20, he would start to just kind of go crazy, try new things that he wouldn't do normally. And then you get to take 60 is where he is saying his line deliveries are so extreme. There's no question. If you did that in any movie today, you would get laughed at. But within the context of this movie and, the idea that he's possessed by the hotel and that he's going insane, it does work. But it's like if anyone else made this movie and cast Jack Nicholson as Torrance, I don't think we'd get a performance like this from Jack.
Well, no, and I think you hit it, is that nobody would keep going and going and going with it. And there's some truth to be said about when you reach a point of exhaustion and then you just push past it, you really get into pulling deep from within yourself of your talents and what you can do. I think we've all been there with work, even just on your regular job. You just get to a point where it's like, how can I possibly do one more thing this week? And you're like, well, but I have to. And then you do it, and what you come up with, you're like, man, that was really good. I should try that again, when I'm not overthinking it too much, And so I think that's kind of neat that Kubrick brought that out of him. He drove him crazy doing it. And we've already talked about what he did to poor Shelley Duvall. And there should be some mercy extended to her for this. But I'm going to be another one of the people that piles on and says, this is the one thing in this movie that has never, ever worked for me. And it's not the way she looks. She looks like she should look in the time. That's not about looks. It's the performance she gives and the meekness of it. And part of it is having come to know the book. And the one thing I will give that miniseries right for, Rebecca De Mornay is awesome in that role. And she is exactly what Wendy's supposed to be. Not only a looker, but a strong woman who pushes back and does not take it the way that Wendy does. And Wendy pushes back a little bit in this movie, but she's pretty much a wuss. And that has always grated on me as to why you would make this character so submissive and so beaten down to this point that it grates on the audience's nerves. At least it grates on my nerves. I watch her and I want to grab her and go, come on, get with it.
Oh yeah, that's another big point of contention with this movie. People are 50-50 on this. Shelley Duvall is a very good actress who before this she was in Annie Hall. She won the Cannes Film Festival Award for Best Actress for this Robert Altman movie called Three Women. So Kubrick knew that she was a good actress, and he picked her, I think, because that she is a good actress, and I think it's because you take one look at her and she could not take Jack Nicholson in a fight. Like if that was Sigourney Weaver, which realistically could have happened, if that was Sigourney Weaver or, random example, a younger, like say Katharine Hepburn, you just wouldn't be as afraid. But you take one look at her and it's like, she was actually perfect casting for, Olive Oil in Popeye. She's like, skinny as a rake. So you take one look at her and it's like, when things break bad, you're like, I don't think she's not going to handle it. Although it's weird. On paper, when I was watching the movie, I was like, at the things that she does, she actually comes off a lot smarter than Duvall is playing him. Like she gets the drop on him. She knocks him out and she knows to lock him in the pantry. She gets Danny out the window. She's got the knife. She's ready to defend herself. But so it's a strong character. But the way Kubrick told Goddard to play it is, he basically broke her. Like I said, you watch the documentary, like she's literally lying down in between takes, like having a nervous breakdown. And like Jack Nicholson, she goes way over the top, but in the other direction, playing this, quivering wreck. And the thing about her in this movie, one thing is that makes it harder for me to trash her performance, it makes it extra disturbing for me actually, is she bears a slight resemblance to my own mom. When I saw this movie in, what year would that have been? 1998, let's say. Like, certain resemblance, like her hair is identical to what my mom's hair looked like in the late 90s. So watching this movie in the 90s, I can't not see my mom in that. So it adds to that disturbing primal thing I'm talking about. Like, all of a sudden it makes me think, what if Dad did come after us with an axe? Because,
Yeah.
But so her performance is, I guess it kind of depends on who you talk to, because maybe Kubrick went too far. As I understand it, he apologized to her after the fact, saying, "I was trying to get something out of you. I'm sorry I went so far." But
I'm sure that made her feel really good about her hair falling out. So,
yeah.
Though, to be fair to Shelley Duvall, again, fine actress in other roles, does incredible work. Really stuff. She's never spoken like harshly ill about it. She just sort of accepted it. It's just an experience and moved on. And I mean, it was a big deal. It got her a lot of other work, and things like that. So she was known for it. It's just a sticking point for me because I have something to compare it to. If they'd never made that other miniseries and I'd never gotten to see an actress that I like Rebecca De Mornay, play that role and knowing what that role was supposed to be and not go like, man, it would be neat just to sort of splice you right into that. I don't know how we can make that work, but
oh yeah, it's kind of par for the course for Kubrick and women. He seems to have a heart. Again, he just seems, I don't know if it's deliberate or not, because if you actually look at his, in his life, his wife and his children are very, strong people. So it's not like he's not basing Wendy off of his wife.
That leads us to Danny. I've already said it. I think Danny Lloyd's awesome. I thought he was great in this role. I think the character is fascinating. And the fact that they have got a sequel book and Ewan McGregor's playing him in Dr. Sleep later in 2019, I'm down to see that, man, and see what that's going to look like. I know nothing about the story or where it goes, but this is definitely a character coming back to I would be down for.
Oh yeah, just on a side note, that trailer when they said they're making a Danny Torrance movie, I was like, really? I was like, unless if they try to pretend I'm not seeing that movie because it's The Shining 2, I'll be really disappointed. Then in the trailer, they start playing the music from the movie, and then I'm starting to get excited for that movie because it looks like, because I only want a guy who is a diehard Shining fan to make that movie, but that's a whole other film. Danny in this movie, it really is one of the better child actor performances from back in the day, for sure. Back when kids really sucked in movies. Like, I watched this movie Outland for the first time not long ago, and the kid who plays Sean Connery's son is so terrible. I'm watching, it's like, God, this is the worst, one of the worst performances I've ever seen, which maybe it's a little harsh to say about a kid, but it's, to compare it to like Danny Lloyd, he is fantastic here because it's not just some cute kid has to be scared like you see in a lot of, horror movies. When he does these shining scenes, he really does look like he's going into some kind of a trance, some kind of a state. Almost like, you see Martin Sheen in that first scene in Apocalypse Now where he's going nuts in the hotel, or maybe not exactly like that. But the faces he has to make, like there's the one where he's calling Halloran, where he's squinching his face up and drool's coming out of his face, out of his mouth. And the moments where he's seeing the visions, and the way Kubrick shows this with these, these smash cuts. So like we're seeing the blood coming out of the hallway, and we smash cut to like his face frozen in a scream, like only for like, a frame or whatever. It's got to be in the top 3 scariest things I've ever seen in my life. I'm 30 years old now. I've seen this movie, got to be 15 times. I still get a little rush in my heart. I feel the urge to kind of like avert my eyes. It just disturbs me, to no end. And so much of that is, it's like Danny Lloyd for, it's just some kid who didn't know what he was doing. He gave a great performance here.
I wonder sometimes how much of that is really true. Because there's some of that's like, there's no way he couldn't have been told, act like you were absolutely freaked out of your mind. Like, maybe they didn't tell him, like, you're seeing 2 girls chopped up in a hallway. Like, they didn't tell him that. But they had to tell him something to get some of that out of him, man. Like, that it's a performance. And this is not a guy that went on to have like this illustrious career. He's not like Leonardo DiCaprio who's still working, or something. This dude went into nothing. Like, I don't know what he does. He was an accountant somewhere or something, but he didn't, go back to this. And that, I don't know. It's a disturbing performance, but it's such a good one. And he's such a likable kid too. Like, that's the other thing too, man. You put kids on screen, it's tough to like them. You're like, unless they're your family, it's like, I don't know if I'm gonna go for this, right? This kid, no, you totally get into him from the get-go. And the little Tony voice with the finger wag, I'm like, man, that is genius, and the way that they play that off is so, so good. And he's great in it. And again, it's a testament to Kubrick, who apparently he's the only person who didn't drive crazy on the set. Maybe because, there were child labor laws and he couldn't like working the hours that he worked everybody else. But when he had him, he got what he wanted out of him. And again, to tell the tale of it, they searched far and wide to get him and find him in the Midwest because they wanted somebody with an accent somewhere between Shelley Duvall and Jack Nicholson. And they kind of got it. And he sort of, I don't know, it's sort of almost British, but not really. And he's just a kid. He just has this sort of straight ahead. But I like how reserved he is too. Like when he's talking with Halloran at the Overlook, and Halloran is trying to tell him like, "Oh man, it's nothing to be, ashamed of or whatever," all this stuff. And he's going like, "You don't see what I see," like you can just see it behind his eyes, going like, "Are you out of your mind?" But again, I have a lot of young nephews, and they're really close to me and stuff. But I see them around other adults sometimes, and they kind of give them this side eye, like, "I don't know if I trust you to tell you that," And so it's neat to see that in a performance.
Oh yeah, Kubrick. He knew what he was doing. He doesn't have too many kids in his movies, but I do notice the times he does have younger actors, for whatever reason, they're pretty good. Like Barry Lyndon. One of my favorite performances were the two kids, Barry Lyndon's stepson and his real son, were actually I thought they were very good in the movie.
Yeah, no, they were. They both really were. They played this role as well. And so it's not unheard of to have good kid performances. It's just this is one that sticks out as like, oh, wow, Yeah. So, and I think when you talk about everybody else as we get into the movie here, like Kurt, honestly, like, I have a lot of questions. I just want to ask you about stuff. You did a great plot summary. I think we got the strokes of the film, but the way this thing opens, we have to talk about that opening drive and that helicopter shot across that beautiful landscape and just that minimalist kind of thumping score. I mean, what a mood setter from the first note. I am in for a sinister ride.
Oh yeah, like I've said, I've seen this. I love this movie. I've seen it a bunch of times, and I have it in my head. Like I've memorized so many of the lines, like that, to the point where every time I think of the movie, I smile, almost like it's a comedy when I think of these lines, like, I intend to change my jacket before the fish and goose soiree, and so many lines where that make me smile. And then every time I sit down and actually try watching the movie, it takes about 30 seconds. That music starts, like the synthesizer type, the bomb music and that helicopter shot. But then the music gets into this, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like a ghostly vocal quality of like a shriek. Like if you ever, like that Edvard Munch painting The Scream, it's like, this is like a sound effect that would go with that painting. It is so disturbing. And yes, sure enough, right away, it just gets my heart going and disturbing. Like, it reminds me of a little bit of the opening of Hateful Eight, which is a movie I'm very heads or tails on. But one thing I love is that opening music, and like the music tells you the story. And like in The Shining, the music, same thing. The music tells you things are going to break bad by the end of this movie, and the music tells you that. And that shot is, by the way, so insane. Although I do notice, for a guy who's such a perfectionist, and you watch the movie, you can plainly see the helicopter in the bottom showing that. But it's a hell of a shot, this helicopter shot. It's like Sidney Pollack said, Kubrick, he went extreme with everything. Like, if he's going to do a helicopter shot, it's going to be the most extreme helicopter shot you've ever seen in your life. And this is, certainly up there. It's like incredible landscape.
I guess could you call that, like, if you know to look for that, you can find it, but you get so blown away by this breathtakingly gorgeous, beautiful scenery. And I've been out to the Rockies. It's beautiful. I've been through the Banff National Forest and up in your part of the world, Kurt. It just takes your breath away seeing this stuff. And to overlay that with this thum, 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 sort of low thumping strings, depressing funeral dirge music, and you see this, what you're seeing is a man driving to his doom. That's what you've come to know having watched this film. And that was my first question for you. We go through the interview and all this stuff. Do you think the Jack Torrance character is haunted by the hotel, and does he get possessed the first time he goes there?
Well, one thing that's good about this movie, much like 2001, is it's very open-ended. Mm-hmm. It's kind of one reason I almost don't want to see that room 237, because I don't really want definitive answers. I don't think.
Let me just tell you, you don't get any definitive answers from that.
Yeah,
you get some really crazy theories, and some of which like you could almost follow, and then you realize like, no, I'm just going to take the blue pill and go back to where I was with it. It's worth seeing for that, but I promise there are no definitive answers to that. Don't be fooled by that.
Oh, right on, because I know Kubrick would hate that, but
yeah.
But what's great is all these fan theories I've heard, at least for me, they all work. Like this movie works one way or the other, and I actually think that, I think he's not possessed until after he, signs up for the job. But one theory I heard that, again, totally works for me is that Jack Torrance is a ghost, that he's been a ghost this whole time, and that's how he's able to see these visions of the hotel. That's why the people in the hotel act like they know him. But again, that's just a theory. They don't necessarily say that in the movie, but that theory works for me. But I like to think it's more just, he was become possessed once he, steps through the door.
And you're right on. You can read it a lot of different ways. I think it's fun to bat around what we think of it. I watched it this time and I was like, I don't know. I can kind of take it like he gets possessed. Like he gets possessed by the whatever, Pazuzu. It's the Exorcist time. Let's talk about that again. He's doing that or something. And then he just, he's already kind of unhinged. This just completes it. But Kubrick will tell you he's reincarnated. That he's a reincarnated spirit of the hotel demands sacrifice, and so it draws people in, but it also just reincarnates people, which is why you have two names for this Grady character, and the one you see is different than the one they tell him about at the interview, because maybe it had to reincarnate it, in between, because it's 10 years in between the happenings, so you don't know what cycle this is on. It's not as frequent as the Aliens versus Predator, pyramid maybe, but it's somewhere in there, right? Like it'll change at some point. And so there's the way Kubrick kind of built it was that, the hotel has to reincarnate its thing to come build its sacrifice for itself. So that's how he read it. But he also said, but you can see whatever you want to in it. I mean, it's yours. Go live with it. The thing he would hate if 237 tried to say that this is definitive what it is. He would actually probably, I think, would kind of get a chuckle out of what everybody wanted to do, especially the parts of it that are all about and this is how he faked the moon landing and all that kind of stuff. Like there's all that kind of stuff in there. But no, I think it's fun to watch Jack Nicholson roll through this, and what I found is after the interview and everything that goes on, there's a lot of dissolves and stuff. Like we have all these, there's a lot of dissolves in this movie, and then we get into smash cut land later on into the movie, especially at the end, just one big harsh smash cut. And we can talk about that, but it's Kubrick's way of easing you into something and then making you feel very unsettled and jarred. It's almost like he's shaking you without having the shaky seats at the moment.
Oh yeah, he knows how to set the tone, and tell a tale, almost because I wonder if Kubrick, he knew I'm not going to Colorado to shoot this movie, so I need to, in case I don't get the proper shots, I need to make sure that the dialogue sells the isolation, and it really does. Even the way they talk about, I love how when we come to the hotel, everyone's leaving, so you do get that sense of everyone really they are going to be as alone as can be. And they just create the sense of isolation, even though it's we're in the United States, probably people are only 3-hour drive away, but it's like they might as well be on another planet.
Yeah, and this is at a time when you couldn't get to the place. Like the idea of something being literally cut off from civilization is not hard to understand. And even today, I can imagine places that I've seen that I'm like, man, if it really snowed you in there, you could be alone for a good bit. And I'm as introverted as the next introvert, but total isolation, that would get to me on some level. And I love how this movie just slow burns with Jack Torrance, where you see him he's bouncing a ball off a wall because he doesn't know what to write. He doesn't know what to do. He's coming unglued piece by piece. There's a scene later where Danny and his mother are playing outside, I think it's after the first snow, and they're running through the maze or something, and Jack's just sort of staring out the window at him, and like the look on his face is like, he's gone bye-bye. Yeah, he's out, and it's, but you see it, but it's even one earlier, they're walking through the maze. This is an awesome shot too for 1980. He looks down on a model of the hedge maze, and you know that Danny and Wendy are walking through it, and you see these two little figures starting to walk around, and then we just slow zoom into it, and we're into them. And I was like, man, in 1980, that, like nowadays you do that on a computer, it renders in 4 hours and nobody cares. That took weeks to even like conceive in 1979, 1980.
Oh yeah, that shot is like it's interesting because it's like we're in this horror movie and we have this little visual effects moment that isn't necessarily frightening, but it's brilliant. Like they filmed a miniature and they literally took a helicopter, and apparently Kubrick is on the end of like a ladder or something, and he's got his eye in the viewfinder as they're hovering directly over a real maze. And they just kind of they cut they blend the two things together. But yeah, that shot, especially the way they cut to, this idea of Jack, watching them in the maze is great. And also that moment where he's looking at him out the window is a classic, Kubrick image of that, the head tilted down, the eyes tilted up and just staring. Cause we get that in 2001. We get that in the opening of Clockwork Orange and in Full Metal Jacket and so on. I would love to ask him. It's like, why he did that in pretty much all of his movies. Whatever it is, it's like I said, it's like real is good, interesting is better, because I've never seen anybody do that.
Well, you're watching these characters that this is my theory about it, is that these characters that in some way in their own world think they are God in some way, and that's God's view. Of whatever it is. Like, I think you can read it that way. Particularly 2001, this movie in Full Metal Jacket that we'll talk about next. Like that, I think you can look at it that way. And it's sort of what he's trying to say. And what you realize is that if you're looking down on something from that point of view and you think you're over it, what's above you looking down on you like that? Because it's that sort of I guess Ansel Adams, art in my head or whatever. It's like, you think you're a big deal, but then pull back, 20,000 feet and really you're not, Oh,
for sure, and that's a decent place to talk about this. One thing I love, again, the thing about Kubrick I love is when he doesn't tell you exactly what's going on. It's a throwaway line of dialogue that Ullman says. It's like, yeah, they built it, 1907, took them 2 years on an Indian burial ground, and they actually fended off some Indian attacks during the construction.
Yeah.
It takes 3 seconds to say. It opens the door to you could do a 10-hour mini-series on everything about the history of this hotel. I like this idea that the Indians were attacking, not to attack the builders, but to warn them, because they know what's there. It's like this great, this movie, the horror movie came out a couple years ago called The Witch, set in, 1600s. And my favorite shot in the movie, our main characters is this family that have been banished from the village. And there's this POV shot of them, they're leaving the village and the gates are closing on this village. And we see 3 Indians they're the only people that are staring at our characters. And they have this look on their face like stupid white people, because they know what's out there. They know the horrors that are out there in the American wilderness. And I like to think something similar happened when they were building this hotel in the turn of the century. Because there's some, whatever, I don't know what Indians they buried, but there's some, insane, evil spirits going on there.
I catch you don't go up above them trees there. The Micmacs knew that ground went south. I mean, really, King would use that, years later and quite well, I might add. Just on a side note, by the way, Pet Sematary may be the closest page to screen that ever got adapted, that first one. For as kind of cheesy as an 80s as that movie is, that's like reading that book and seeing it come to life, and it's freaky. Hearing you talk about this stuff, though, man, like talking to Danny Lloyd's reactions to the scenery and all this stuff, like the hairs are sticking up on my arm and my neck right now. Like this movie just has this unsettling but completely hypnotic way to it, and we should admit, like, this is a slow movie. Like, this movie is like, you get a lot of exposition, but then there's like stretches of minutes where it's a mom talking to a kid and a bunch of thumping noise and nothing's happening. You're just seeing little stuff, but then Kubrick knows when just to put enough on the bait to keep you hooked. Danny's playing in the games room, and then there's two twins just staring at him, Lisa and Louise Burns, who will forever go down as the creepiest people I've ever seen on screen. Like, it's like take Wednesday Addams, but just give her a complete blank expression. And when they talk in unison and play with us forever and ever, I mean, it's, woo, you know, I mean, and I have a young niece who has a voice that she's not British, but it kind of rolls the same way. It has that. And I was with her last weekend, and I'm going like, just stop doing that, because I have this on the brain. And it's just funny because it's like cute, but it's also very sinister and weird. He knows when to throw that in, and then they just turn around and walk away. And it's like, what the hell was that? You know, and Danny's riding his big wheel through the, you know, the maze that is this hotel, which is mirrored by the maze outside. By the way, hedge maze is not in the book. That's a Kubrick thing. Great move, because in the book, it's topiaries. It's animals cut into, you know, out of hedges, and they move around. And it's as dumb as you think it is. Go watch that 97 thing. They do it in that, and it's awful. The maze, great. But the hotel's a maze, too. Danny's riding around and he keeps bumping into these girls. They get the flash of like their grisly death. It's just, you know, all this stuff to keep you unsettled and unhinged. And then we go into, you know, huge rooms where somebody's throwing a tennis ball against the wall because they don't know what to write. You know, and he loses it on his wife when she interrupts him. And, you know, because he's probably typing nothing. He's probably typing pages of, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. You know, but he doesn't want her to know that at the top.
Yeah, you're talking about, you know, this the slow pace of this movie. It's really weird watching this movie after Barry Lyndon, where you can tell it's the exact same crew that made this movie. It's so many of the same techniques. It's just, you know, he has something much more easily, something you can engage with the story. But it's those same slow zooms and this same level. I don't think Ken Adam did the sets for this movie, but these, you know, massive sets. Yeah, he built, you know, this, you know, palatial hotel in England. And one thing I love about that room where he's in the playing the tennis ball, I don't know what room you would call that, but the my favorite thing about that is the windows, especially in the scene later on where he starts to lose it, is the way they simulate white out winter conditions by they just blasted in these lights right out in the studio, right outside the glass, to make it look like it's, you know, blinding snow. And it looks like blinding snow. I haven't been in quite that level of snow up in Canada, but it is so realistic. I bet Kubrick, he's a master with this kind of thing. I'll bet you if you didn't know any better, you would just think they did go to Colorado and shot in this giant hotel out in the mountains.
Yeah, that's the beautiful thing about this is like the hotel's geography. Like if you try to draw it out, it doesn't make any sense. But you get lost in that and you just don't think about it because you see this beautiful outside shot, and then you go inside, and what you don't realize is that you're in a studio, you're in a set in Elstree, you know, and it's just he built the hotel to his liking. You know, inside of another thing. Instead of finding the hotel and shooting, no, I'll just build one, you know, and did it all for $19 million. It's interesting to note, though, Roy Walker's the production designer on this, who did Barry Lyndon. Did this, did Eyes Wide Shut. Those are his 3 Kubrick films. And so it's neat to see somebody who can take those big wide open spaces and those castles, right? And then basically recreate American castles are our big hotels. Like we don't have castles here.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, really they are. Like there are big luxury resorts and things like that. And so I get it. It's the same sensibility. You know, even though it's not America at all, it doesn't even exist. Like it, and if you think about it, it couldn't exist either. Like this, there's one reading of this movie is that you're actually seeing the dreams of Jack Torrance and the book he is writing. But normally everything happens as normal. He and his wife and his son spend a winter in Colorado. He writes this amazing book and he ends it with his, you know, his own character that he's kind of thrown into a story dying. You know, he kind of works on his own fears and then they go away, you know, and that's what it is. And I don't think was what Kubrick intended. I know that's not what Stephen King's story is about, but it's an interesting reading of it. If you want to have that, you can do that. There's tons of good YouTube videos in that. I mean, you can fall down the rabbit hole watching these, on that. But the set designs of this, they draw you in because it should be mentioned, the hotel is like the 5th character in the movie. Oh, yeah. It may even be the 4th one. It may even be more important than Halloran, who's really kind of I hate to say the stereotypical like magical black man, but he kind of plays that role. And he's there to just sort of advance the idea of what The Shining is. And I think Scatman Crothers gives a great performance. And by all accounts, he's just another person that Kubrick tortured, the entire set and hated this and hated being a part of it, but gave a good performance nonetheless. But his scenes with Danny are great. But you could argue that the hotel's a bigger character than he is because it is a living thing. This hotel is alive.
Oh, yeah. As far as movie locations, like fictional locations, this is, as far as horror movies go, I think this is number one. It's like number two is like, the Nostromo in Alien. Number three is, just that what you want to call that little bit of the Atlantic Ocean surrounding the Orca is number three. And yeah, that hotel, it's so weird. I mean, a couple of years ago for work, we went up to this mountain in Lake Louise, I think it's called, in Alberta, at this hotel, very palatial in the mountains, and it was, everyone else was thinking about the seminar they were at. I was spent the entire time going, this is too much like the Overlook. And just stepping outside at night, looking around, it's like, oh man, the only thing I was missing, I should have had the Midnight and the Stars and You 1920 song playing on my headphones, walk around that place because it was so eerie. Second I got home, I had to watch The Shining immediately because it's such, flashbacks. But yeah.
Kid you not, I was out in Denver, Colorado earlier in 2019 for a conference, right? In a brand new resort that has been built out there. It's really like right across from the airport. Gorgeous place. It's the Gaylord in Colorado. Go look it up online. Beautiful glass, wide open. It's out in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing around it yet. Gorgeous. And I got to thinking in my head as I was looking at it and taking pictures of it. It's sunny. It's, it's spring, so it's real pretty and everything. And things are just starting to turn green. And I was like, I wonder what this would look like in winter, the way it gets here in Colorado. And I honestly started kind of humming that song in my head. I was having the same moment, Kurt. I was walking around going like, this doesn't look anything like it. But they had like rooms that were sort of made up in some of that kind of decor. And I thought, man, coming out here when it was snowy, I would be having total like Shining flashbacks and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
It's in your head if you see it. But you see this and you go into any big hotel anywhere, I dare say you can't not think about this movie and that scenery.
Absolutely, yeah. And also, you're talking about Halloran. He's one of my favorite parts of this movie. Scatman Crothers, awesome character actor who, aside from this, I know from Twilight Zone, the movie, where he was the only good actor in that weak Spielberg segment, but he was great playing this, specter of death or whatever you want to call him. And he's in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with Nicholson, and he was hysterically funny as the night shift guy. And he's, fantastic actor. And here, when I was watching it this time, it's like he's playing Professor X, a bald guy with psychic powers, trying to teach this young child how to use his mutant abilities. And I did think
Danny Lloyd as an X-Men, but you know what? It works.
Oh, for sure. And I think Crothers, he totally dodges the over-the-top nature of the acting in this movie. He felt very real and naturalistic to me. He has one of the only genuine, intentional laughs in this movie where he asks Danny, he says, "Do you like ice cream?" He says, "Yes." Like, I thought you did. And it's just this tiny moment, but clearly he just started, if you see it a second time, he was reading his mind, totally. as soon as he saw him.
Yeah, I think what he does is, as everybody else is playing it kind of big, particularly Nicholson is playing it big and Duvall will play it big, he plays it very underneath, very cool, as he would be. He's been around the Overlook for a long time, and he shines, right? So if we were to believe that about him, he knows what this hotel can do, and it hasn't been able to corrupt him, which I think is interesting because you get the idea that the hotel wants Danny because he's so good and has such power. Like, if I can get him, man, that'll really be a collection to put. It's like an infinity stone or something, that's the way it kind of plays in the book too, is like the evil energy of the hotel really wants Danny. Like, it'll get him through Jack, but it really wants Danny because Danny's like a super mutant, right? But the fact that Halloran hasn't given into the temptation, hasn't been able to be corrupted by it, it's almost like the hotel's pissed off at him about it. And it's one of the reasons it kills him. It demands sacrifice or whatever. But I think the hotel tries to kill him because it's like, I can't get to that one, so I'm going to make sure I take it out.
Oh, yeah, that scene of him and Danny and the explanation of what The Shining is, that's one of my favorite scenes in any Kubrick movie. They are both so great in that scene. Crothers really knowing how to play a dialogue scene with a kid and the way he goes about it. Like, this is a man explaining psychic powers, but he's totally, and the way Kubrick wrote it too, the way he's telling it in a way a child can understand. It has a sweetness to it you don't expect from Kubrick. It's something, Spielberg would do. Right. Also, what I love about just as a whole is this movie as a horror movie, that the title, The Shining, it's a positive thing, really. It's like with the way he talks about it, like it's something his grandmother called, just to use this telepathy they use to talk to each other. Like, there's nothing inherently scary about that word at all. And when you hear The Shining, you think of this one of the scariest movies. And the way he explains to a child that the Overlook is haunted is both sweet and horrifying. Because he's trying to work out, how do I tell this kid he's probably going to see some scary shit in the next few months? And the way you can see it, the way Crothers is like, he's thinking about it. It's like, well, let's, when somebody burns toast, it can leave a trace of itself behind, right? And it's like, he's explaining, same thing goes with murder. Like, if you kill somebody, like, I like that in certain horror stories, the idea if you kill somebody, that's how you end up with a ghost. Like, like in The Sixth Sense, like, those ghosts are particularly angry and everything. Also, I kind of feel for Halloran watching the movie last time, because I'm thinking, he's working at this place, 8 months out of the year. He probably has to see these ghosts every single day. But he's okay with it, because he knows that there is, like in The Sixth Sense, they can't touch you. Like, it's just, it's like he's learned how to shut them out and just get on, carrying on, making a steak for the guy in room 237 or whatever. But the idea that he has to tell, the idea is, he has to tell this kid that, and that's the best moment of that scene, is out of nowhere, Danny says, "What's in room 237? And Crothers, again, he's so good. He doesn't yell at Danny or anything, but he talks to him like a parent warning a child. And he says, I have to tell this kid. I can't, I'm not going to be mean to this kid, but how do I get this kid to not go in that damn room? And he says, there ain't nothing in room 237. But you ain't got no business going in there anyway, so stay out, all right? Stay out. And of course, it's just a brilliant, chilling way of making an audience remember just that number, 237, when it pops up in another 45 minutes. Because it's made this guy who's not afraid of ghosts, it makes him afraid, whatever's in there. And it's just a brilliant bit of horror from Kubrick there.
I'm glad you said it that way, because that's exactly the way I read it, too. Is that the guy that is not afraid of this place at all, there's one thing he won't cross over either, because he knows. Like, that might get to me. Like, I'm not going to do it. And I'll tell you now, as a little kid, that was the scene that I had in my head, could not sleep, because I couldn't get that out of my head. And just the woman and the way she turns and that whole bit, it's just, whew. And even to this day, like, it's still it's one of the most effective horror scenes ever. The slow burn dissolve into madness is what that is. And, it's a great haunted house trick. I mean, it really is. But what I think is neat is that this hotel, as Danny is riding around, you get the sense that he's not really going anywhere. He's just riding around. I remember riding my bike as a kid. I kind of always knew where I was heading. Like, I knew where I was allowed to ride and stuff, and I, kind of kept up with it. It was just what I did. I never just rode until I didn't know where I was. And I almost wonder if the hotel is not, like, leading him to that room in some way. Because he goes by it and the door's closed and he sees it and he can't get in the door that first time. But his curiosity is stoked, right? So then the little girls kind of border him in down that way, and the door's open with the key in it the next time. And that's when he goes in, and of course, he's apparently attacked by the woman and comes out bruised up and all that stuff. And then we get to see Jack do it too. But I don't know. I through the years just read it as the hotel is going to compel him to go to that. And like any child, if you tell him not to do something, I mean, that's like, putting the bait out there, like, go to it. Even if you do it in a real good stern way, like he did, that can be worn down over time. If I just keep seeing that 237, I just got to know what's in there, and he's a curious kid.
Just on the whole, a brilliant thing Kubrick does with, setting the tone is, he keeps repeating, you guys are going to be alone here for 5 months. So when Danny first sees those two girls, it's while everyone's packing up, could very easily be, there's someone's kid, it could be guests of the hotel. So, so you don't really think much of it. But the idea is we cut to a month later, they're definitely isolated, and he sees them again. It's just such an instant way of, like, They're supposed to be alone, and it's like that. What did I hear? Like a classic one-line horror story. It's like he was the last man in the world, and there was a knock at the door. It's like, what's the scariest thing you could possibly encounter is just anybody else in this place, let alone, what this kid encounters. Which again, almost get a sense of like Seven. Like what you don't see is scarier. I don't even want to picture what exactly happened when Danny went through that door, because he's covered. Oh God, he's covered in bruises. His shirt's ripped, and then you see what the woman looked like. It's like that's disturbing.
Yeah, and what you would think is, and what I've always sort of wondered is, like, does it manifest differently for each person? Because for Jack, it's this gorgeous, woman who walks out of a tub naked, and it's, it's every fantasy, right, that he's got that he doesn't have, because she's a complete contrast to Shelley Duvall, and then to turn into the hideous thing that she is. Like, I wondered, like, maybe for Danny, it's like this person cooking dinner or something like that. Like, it's something that would draw him in, because I don't think he would be sexually attracted to her. He would probably be like, oh, I'm sorry, and walk out of the room. What would bring him in, and then for it to turn on him? And, it doesn't kill him, though. That's the thing. And that's what's interesting about this is Halloran tells him they can't touch you, they can't hurt you, but clearly they can. Right? Like they grab his neck and kind of bruise him up a little bit. So there's some corporeal power to these ghosts.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I like that they don't entirely explain is why the hotel is sort of after Danny. As I understand it, they explain it a lot more in the book. It's like, it's a direct thing. The hotel wants him. Like, I mean,
right. They want his power.
They want it. It wants it. The hotel senses his power. But I like that they don't explain that, and it just makes it all the more insidious of like, what are you doing going after a kid? And all the more insidious is that when Jack is basically told in so many words, we need you to kill your kid, he doesn't act confused by that. It's like when he's told we're going to handle this in the most gruesome way possible. It's like I can't remember the exact line, but it's like there's nothing I look forward to more, or whatever it is he said.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's two conversations he has with the ghost of Delbert Grady, and I love how you dropped it in the plot summary too, where Delbert goes like, "I had to correct my daughter, I had to correct my wife," and he just Philip Stone just rolls that off of his tongue, and it's another Barry Lyndon hangover there, and it's watching this guy do that, and it's like, whoa. And you see Jack starting to go like, oh, that's what you call it. And then when he's at the pantry and he's like, will you handle this swiftly? Because I'm not going to let you out if you're not going to take care of business. Because this little demure woman beats you in the head with a bat. And, we didn't think she was going to be that formidable, but clearly she is. And Jack's like, no, I'm looking forward to it. Do you have my word? And the way he says it, it's just... Oh yeah, it's like, well, yeah, he's gone. It's over now. It's happening. And he goes directly to him, man. I mean, he tears that room apart with that axe. And there's a fun side story. I didn't realize this. Jack Nicholson apparently had been a firefighter at one time in his life, and they had the fake door up, and he just destroyed it. So they put a real one up and made him break through the real one. Because he knew how to swing an axe. He knew how to do it. And there's a great behind the scenes. You see him kind of warming up with the axe, and Shelley Duvall is looking at it like, "Oh God, please don't hit me with that." She's like, "Please just let me survive this." So, and to get through it, but no, all this tension is building up, right? And we get the crazy woman in the room, and the way all that comes down, and we do get a great scene though when Wendy confronts Jack with the bat in the big open room, right? And he's going up the stairs after her. And it's just this sort of cat and mouse. And I mean, apparently it's a lot of ad lib here too from Nicholson going like, I'm not going to hurt you. I'm just going to bash your freaking skull in, Yeah. And he's just, it's so sinister to hear him. It's very Joker-esque to hear him saying it to her. And the way Duvall is just absolutely freaking out about it. It's one of the times I thought her performance was really good. Like I was like, hey, no, that's a good natural reaction. You should be doing that.
Oh yeah,
yeah. But the thing that she gets the drop on him is what's neat.
Yeah, Jack didn't see that coming. He thought he could take his wife, and he was wrong. And that whole scene. I mean, obviously, the beginning of that scene is the finding of the pages, and the talk about making something that isn't necessarily scary, blood-curdlingly terrifying. Guy wrote he wrote the same sentence on a piece of paper. You could do that on a computer and just hold copy and paste, stick it 5 seconds. But such a simple way of indicating not just kind of crazy, but absolutely bonkers, lost your damn mind is like got to be 400 pages, and they all have the same thing. And I love Duvall's. She's not necessarily scared. It's almost like she's crying for him. It's like, my husband's lost his mind. He's been in here for last month typing the same thing. And Jack coming in saying, how do you like it? It's like, right when we're thinking this guy's lost his mind. And I think at this point he's had the talk with Delbert about he's going to do something to this family. So then we see he's lost his mind, and then, the way he very slowly walking towards her. You don't necessarily know what he's going to do with his bare hands, but if she didn't knock him out, he would have done something. But Nicholson in that scene, he is so good. That's like he is so big and over the top. But the way Kubrick shoots it with that the white out light coming through the windows and that music, I think some of the music was composed, but a lot of this music on the soundtrack is just music from 1930s classical composers. Bela Bartok is his name. And some of that music is so terrifying that it's like this guy knew he was going to that someone was going to put this in a horror movie. It is so terrifying to listen to.
Right, like if you read about it, like it's some sort of like ode to his mother or something. I don't know that, but like, it'd be funny if it was, because that would be exactly something like Kubrick would repurpose as a part of this, But you're right. I mean, that's the thing about good classical scores, is that you can take a piece of music that's intended for one set of emotions and just flip it into a different scene, and it gives you another set, right? And I think the thing about Wendy that I got, and it's a stress reaction, that her first inclination is to kind of laugh. Like, she sort of chuckles a little bit, and then she starts to get like really nervous, and then she starts freaking out, because not only is the sentence typed over and over, it's typed in formation, Kurt. It's in Christmas trees, It's slanted left, it's all right, it's kind of going one side. I mean, we had to elaborately think about the madness to line that sentence up over and over and over. It's such an effective tool. And Kubrick lays it out perfectly, and it's one of the coolest like reveals, because it is the final note. Like, if you weren't sure, is Jack Torrance like gone? Oh yeah, he's gone. It's over for him at this point, if you weren't sure. And the fact that Wendy gets out of it, though, is not what you expect, again, because in lesser films, like, he would take her out and then Danny would have to come in and psychically, zap his dad into the wall or something and then run away in the snow. But that's not this movie. It's not that story either, thankfully. And we get much better. I mean, she does the smart thing too, man. She's like, not only did I hit him in the head with the bat, lesser horror women would have run out the window, right? Or run out the door. She's like, well, I gotta lock this dude up so he can't get to anybody. She knows this hotel is as good as he does, probably better, because she's been the one doing all the damn work. And so she throws him in the pantry or the freezer. And I'm like, that's a great move, Wendy. That's smart. So, but you just didn't count on the ghost coming to unlock it for him, which that is messed up.
Oh yeah, that moment, it's like I never thought about it. I've seen, when I saw the movie 10 times at that point, and it never really occurred to me. I think it was someone on the DVD, one of the people they were talking to, said they love that moment because it's the only time in the movie that there is 1,000% thing you cannot attribute to hallucination or cabin fever, is somebody unlocked that door, because it definitely wasn't Wendy and it definitely wasn't Danny. And it just makes you, it's just so unsettling, this idea of, what else could they choose to do if they really wanted to? It's like, this thing they choose to do is unleash this madman to go butcher his own family. It is just, as the movie it just keeps ramping up these levels of horror and being disturbing, and that's one of the freakiest bits.
Something you get from multiple watchings, too, I think, is to realize that if you follow along with what Kubrick basically intended and kind of what the main line is that this hotel is recreating this horror for itself because it needs the energy from it or whatever, the sacrifice of it. And so it has to go through these, really elaborate steps to recreate this. And how many times has the hotel had to do this? You start thinking since 1907, you're like, how often has this hotel had to do this? Like at least since 1921, because if that's when we're to believe it starts, so this cycle is every, 7, 8 times now. I mean, really, like that's, you can just boggle yourself thinking about how many times does this happen? You know, and I mean, spoiler alert: in the book, the hotel gets destroyed at the end of it because they drop a line in about, okay, you got to watch the boiler. And in the book, like, there's a chapter about you got to watch the boiler, and this whole guy ranting about the boiler, and you get his whole like backstory because Stephen King goes down rabbit holes and stuff too. But like, they don't check the boiler, and the boiler freaking explodes. Like, it's part of the thing in the movie. It's part of the ticking time clock too that happens in the book. And I'm glad they don't do that here, and that it's left intact so that it can just do it again. Because, I mean, that's one thing Kubrick was right about. Is just like at the end of Halloween, like, you shoot him, he's on the ground, and then he's gone, you know, and it takes 40 years for us to ruin that. But, you know, in the end, like, oh, that's a creepy ending that he's still out there somewhere, right? You know, the idea is that it's still out there among us, right? It's still, you know, out there. Maybe that was the end of the Friday the 13th movie too. It's like, Jason's still out there, right? As dumb as that movie is, and as dumb fun as it is, you got to leave people on the idea that, like, well, you just thought you got away. And like, even something like Jaws, right? The shark's destroyed. It's not the only shark in the ocean, right?
Sure.
You know, and I mean, yeah, I've always been creeped out by those guys swimming back on the, you know, the two buoys, and I'm like, what? That's sail. You look like a seal. Like, you're just, you're bait. So I'm like, well, I know we're at that happy ending, Spielberg, and you're not thinking it, but I am. So, but I mean, and this movie ends with the idea of like, and it's just going to happen again, right? You know, and I don't know. We haven't got code to the ending yet, but we're ramping up to it. And when the freeze run locks, man, all hell breaks loose. Because Jack's going through the hotel with his axe, right? The iconic face in the door, the "Here's Johnny" line, which apparently Kubrick didn't watch The Tonight Show, so had no idea what the hell that was. And was just
Is
like,
that right?
Sure. Yeah, he had no idea what that was. Nicholson just did it on like take 88 or whatever because he was just worn out, and you can see it on his face. And Kubrick left it in, and by happenstance left it in. Like, could have just took another one where he said something else or whatever the line was supposed to be. And it was years later he realized that, like, oh, that's a thing. Like, he had no idea, you know. So it's just like, well, clearly the man was probably still trying to write his Napoleon movie while The Tonight Show was on and didn't pay attention to Ed McMahon and his great lines. But you get all that. We talked about Halloran's death. It's gruesome. It's really one of the bloodiest things next to the elevator pour out that we get in the movie. And I mean, we talk about like great sound editing too. Jack comes around the corner, hits him with that axe, and I mean, you hear that thud into that, you know, the chest cavity with that axe, and it just makes my skin crawl thinking about it.
Yeah, that shot, it's a super long, must be at least 60 seconds of Halloran very slowly walking down the hall, and it's a scene that I find unintentionally funny. It still works as a scary scene, but it is just so weird. That Jack was just hiding behind a column with this axe the whole time and just buries it into his chest, and it's you know, I love that you know, guttural scream Nicholson lets out in that scene. But yeah, that's, you know, that it is. I remember, I was watching it, you know, the other day, thinking, you know, it's such a scary movie. And I think of it as such, you know, violent, bloody movie. There's exactly technically two deaths if you count, you know, Jack freezing to death. But, you know, it's like this very, very low body count for such a, you know, classically, you know, movie known for its violence and blood.
Well, good haunted house movies, though, don't have a lot of kills. They just have a lot of scares, right? I mean, this is when the movie goes full haunted house. And I got a question for you here, because Wendy's running around, and she sees some really weird stuff, okay? The furry costume and the sexual encounter that's going on, that's its own. Like, you could spend a day talking about what that's supposed to be. The skeletons in the ballrooms downstairs or in the lobby and all this stuff. And my question to you is, like, Danny could see these things because The Shining, you know, the hotel could sort of project it to him. Has the hotel, like, reached, like, maximum potency or something that it can now manifest that stuff for Wendy? Or does she have The Shining and just not know it? Like, I don't know how you're supposed to read that. How does she all of a sudden see all this weird stuff?
Well, yeah, again, it's pretty open. It would make sense that, you know, some people say that, you know, Jack and Wendy have The Shining, which is why Danny has it. But I always like the idea, especially in haunted house movies, like whether it's The Sixth Sense or Poltergeist, I like the idea of ghosts being bored and just wanting to mess with people and like wanting to scare people. So I like to think that that's the overlook is, I don't think it's trying to hurt Wendy because I think it can see, oh, he's going out into the maze, it's all over. So he's thinking, the hotel just wants to scare the living daylights out of her. And it's talk about something that isn't necessarily scary being scary. It's just this idea that we're supposed to be isolated, and all of a sudden there's a guy in a bear costume who's going down on some guy in a bed. It's very funny, but in the context of where they're supposed to be alone, it is absolutely terrifying. And I've been in a hotel where, completely unbeknownst to me, there was a furry convention going on. I can tell you that is accurate. It's a long story, but we were there to have brunch. They were doing something else in the hotel, and I can tell you that scene in The Shining is every bit as disturbing as it was for me on this day in question, but that's a whole other thing.
Oh my goodness. I admit, wow. I did not expect that to be a reveal on the show tonight. Wow, man. Like,
yeah, that was
I mean, that's like the time I went to Vegas. It was the Electric Daisy Carnival, but it's not nearly as crazy, but I didn't know what the hell was going on. I just knew it was not a part of what I was there for. You know? So, wow.
But yes, this section of the movie, like that scene is absolutely terrifying, especially that zoom in. It just makes something very bizarre, so scary. And it's such a simple thing of walking into that room, that giant room, and all of a sudden it's dark. There's skeletons and cobwebs. It's like something, it's probably, incredibly cheap. It's like, go down to the Halloween store, get some skeletons. It's 20 seconds long. It is that's one of the scariest things I've ever seen, because it's one of those things, like, there's a lot of that in this movie, of sort of, I call can you imagine type horror. Like, I think, like, the Babadook was good at that, where it's like, can you imagine if you did, let's say you woke up at 3 a.m, you go get a drink of water, and you turn around and you saw that. If you saw the Babadook, or if you woke up and you saw all of a sudden your living room was full of skeletons that you didn't know were there or something. Like that, it psychologically, it's just, at least it clicks with me, where it's like, that would be the most, that would give me a heart attack and I would die on the spot. And then the final, the cycle of the elevator, of blood that she sees, that image, like I keep talking about in these movies, Kubrick, whether the movie's good or bad, he always has these moments that you just will remember for the rest of your life, whether it's a particular shot or something. And that's one of them, is this image of, I don't know if he got that from the book or not, but that image of the elevator doors opening and blood gushing down this hallway is so, it's terrifying in the movie. It's actually scarier in a different context, which is one of the teasers for the movie is just that shot of the hallway, and the credits going down the screen saying, based on the best-selling novel by Stephen King, starring Jack Nicholson, The Shining. And it's just all one shot. The blood just starts pouring out. It's that shot. All in one shot. They don't cut away. It's so in and of itself disturbing and terrifying. In that, I encourage everyone to check out that trailer. It's got to be the best bit of advertising I've ever seen. And fun fact, apparently, how did Kubrick get a teaser trailer in theaters involving gallons and gallons of blood? Apparently he told the censors, it's just rusty water. It's not blood. And they bought it. So that's how you get, the bloodiest trailer in the history of film.
Think about the level of scares for Wendy at the end there and what happens. She walks in on two people having sex, which is supposed to be like this embarrassment scare. But the fact that they both stare at her, almost like, you want to join? Or you're just going to stand there and watch. And so it's unnerving. It's like, that's not really what I wanted to do, right? The whole dog man thing, right? all that kind of stuff. And then you go into and here's a bunch of skeletons of all the dead people that have been here before. That's just classic. It's like, whoa, the dead people scared. It's not grotesque. It's gross and it's scary, but there's not meat hanging off them or whatever. And then, as if she can't be freaked out enough, here's a river of blood. Get the hell out of my hotel is pretty much what the hotel is saying, is like, fine, leave. And she goes, wisely again. I'll give Wendy credit for this, for an actress that has played the character to be dumber than she really is. She's smart enough to go and be like, I'm out. Yep, I'm done. Yeah. Peace. And she runs out to find, Halloran's, snow cat, because we had talked about before, like Jack's disabled the radio, he's torn up their snow cat, all this stuff. So Halloran kind of sacrifices himself so she can live and Danny can live ultimately too. We got to talk about that chase through the 2-part chase through the hedge maze with Danny running ahead of Jack and how smart Danny is to go brakes, back up, hide in the hedge, and let him go right by. And I'm like, man, this is, well, I keep bringing it up. It's the Top Gun move that, happens for years, right? You just go hit the brakes and they fly right on by. And I'm like, what a genius move by a kid. And having nieces and nephews that like to play hide and go seek, this is exactly the kind of move one of them pulls. And I'm like, that's pretty smart. But they never get it over on me because I've seen this movie too much.
Yeah, that scene is, it's a hell of a climax. And again, you're right. This movie goes from like being kind of scary to, like, it's very slow and everything, but that last, 5 minutes is so fast and explosive, kind of like that last couple minutes of Jaws where the shark's just tearing the whole boat apart, everything's going crazy. So we're cutting between that and this chase through the maze, and I love the way they set that up of Danny and Wendy know the maze, because they were, they were spending time with each other because they like each other. Jack doesn't particularly care for them. He doesn't want to spend time with them. So they were in the maze that whole month. They know it inside and out, and he knows Jack doesn't. I don't think he was just running away to get away. He knows, it's really cold out. I can lure him in here and we can get away. And, again, talking about, Kubrick, really knows how to design a set is apparently that was not real snow. It's industrial salt. And it was some kind of, formaldehyde or something to get this fog going that really does simulate. It makes it look like it is, minus 30. Like I've been in minus 30 at night. That's what it has a look to it, and that's what it looks like. And yeah, it's genius. Makes it's like Obi-Wan talking about the Sand People travel in single file to hide their numbers. That's what Danny does, sort of, is covering his footprints, and Jack is I don't think he's not thinking too much. If he really was thinking, he probably wouldn't have gone into that maze in the first place. He probably should have just waited by the car. But he's in this total animal state, screaming Danny, talking about Jack, going over the top. He totally evolves into this he might as well be a werewolf or something. He's so inhuman, and then eventually does just start, howling at the moon, basically.
And years later would play a werewolf in a horrible movie.
That's right.
Called Wolf. So oddly enough, yeah. No, it is like he howls at the moon, and he's sort of having this guttural thing. And I look at this as if indeed the hotel has possessed him, this is the ghost sort of casting off that body that it doesn't need anymore, because it's like, well, didn't get him this time, but we did kill that other guy that had the shining, so we'll call that a half win. We'll pick it up again in 10 years because we're still here and you're all gone. But I love the smash cut. We have this madness and then boom, frozen Jack. And it's just like, wow.
That's a great cut. That's pretty scary too. That scared the hell out of me the first time I saw that.
Oh, yeah, it's just a striking image because his eyes have rolled back in his head basically. Yeah. And he's got all this, it almost looks kind of like Ash and Alien with all the white stuff, after his head's
sure. Yeah.
It's very similar, and it's just frozen to death, and it's foreshadowed early on. He tells the story of the Donner Party freezing to death, when they're on the ride up there, and he freezes to death with that axe in his hands, and it's just. And the thing is, and the thing about this movie that I like is that it doesn't give us any resolve. We see Danny and Wendy get in the snowcat. We assume it's got enough gas to get back to wherever civilization is, right? Yeah. We don't know what happens to them. Well, obviously Danny Torrance lives. I guess if you've read Dr. Sleep, you know how that goes. I'm curious to hear how, that and see how that works out in the movie coming out this winter. But yeah, they go off and they're gone. And we go back to the hotel, which, by the way, is in pristine condition. There's nothing wrong with it. And we just zoom in on that one photo. From 1921. And it's almost, it's almost like the hotel knows how to reset itself. And it's like, well, I guess when everybody comes back to work, we'll just, we'll try that again some other time.
Yep. Talking about, Kubrick is great with the mystery angle of his movies, big time with 2001. And this is no explanation. No. They don't set that up earlier in the movie, aside from Jack being at that party in the ballroom and, everyone knows who he is. But it's a weird note to end on, because you really could have feasibly just cut the credits on Jack's frozen body or whatever, saying, the movie's over. But Kubrick wants to just give this bizarre question mark in everyone's head because it makes you think, was that photo already there, or is the photo there now? Because I read into that as like the hotel, like Jack's dead. He's fine, he's dead, so he is now a part of that hotel. The only thing missing in that image, if it were me, I would have put Halloran in that photo. I would have put Grady and Lloyd and the woman in the tub in that photo, just to really close the book on the hotel, claims you if you die there. Yeah. But it's a hell of a thing to just end on that date, because it makes you go, because it's not necessarily a jump scare, but it just makes you go, what the hell? What does that mean?
It's one last unnerving piece, because again, you've got ironic music going. You've got this really sort of sweet love song in the background, and this crooning, and you're reminded of that line, like a lesser filmmaker nowadays would echo that line in the background, like, "You're the caretaker. You've always been the caretaker," that you heard 30 minutes earlier. But if you've watched this movie, that's in your head. And now you're like, oh, and it leaves you again with, what's the answer? And Kubrick has copped to it that, the hotel recreates Jack. It's recreated him several times, or it recreates what it needs to get its sacrifice. Grady and Jack seem to be the recreations over and over again. And think about it. We know nothing about Jack's family, where he's from. We know they're from Vermont. There's no mention of parents, anything like that. So he's just he just sort of appears, has a life to get to a point, Mm-hmm. And it's this point, and, it can't get what it wants, so maybe it'll do it again. Maybe it won't. We don't know. The book's a little more definitive of how it ends. This leaves it more open-ended, and I got to say, look, the book's good. I'm not going to dog it. It's one of King's better books. King always struggles with endings. I've said that forever, and I'll continue to say that. It's a little unsatisfying, but it's not a bad read. But this is a completely different experience, and I think it's much more interesting. Like you said earlier, Kubrick said, good is good, but interesting is better. And I think he chose the interesting way out with the ending.
Oh, yeah. It's like, you put that idea in my head. I didn't even think about this idea that the hotel is, quote unquote, is alive and well when this is over. And the idea that it happened to Grady, it happened to Jack, it's probably going to happen to the next caretaker, because like they said, they can't keep the hotel open 12 months out of the year. So the next caretaker is going to have to deal with this again. Or will they? Again, it leaves you that question in your head. It's like, what is the Star Child at the end of 2001? It's just something to let your imagination run with.
Exactly. Well, you figure the next caretaker who has any touch of The Shining around him, either himself or through his family or something, they're going to have to deal with it. Again, maybe the normal caretakers just have a boring winter. I don't know. But, because there seems to be some time in between. Because you figure caretaker after caretaker died, the place would be we're done. The reputation, but even in 1980, we get out, we can't, people would write about that. No. 10 years in between, And there's a scene earlier where Jack looks got all these newspapers on the desk or whatever, and it's in the book where he discovers all these stories about the Overlook that they've kept for years, and he becomes obsessed with the Overlook, the Jack character does, and you kind of get the sense that that's what he's writing about, but it's never dropped in the movie, and Kubrick doesn't really follow it. But just knowing that detail from the book, there's a scene where when he's yelling at Wendy about interrupting his concentration, there's a big book with a bunch of old newspaper clippings in it. And I'm like, oh, that's what that's supposed to be, I guess, or whatever. But you see that Jack is obsessed with the place. But either way, this open-ended ending, it leaves you with all these questions and, again, makes you want to see it again. That's why the movie was a financial success. It wasn't a critical success. And then years later, people have come around on it, I think, for the most part, and given it a pass. But I think you're right to call it the most accessible film Kubrick has, because it is one made for the broad audience. Maybe not since Spartacus did he make anything that was really meant for the movie-going audience, and this one definitely hit that. Well, Kurt, I think we're at the part of the podcast where it's time to give final thoughts, recommendations, and popcorn ratings. So what are yours for Stanley Kubrick's The Shining?
Well, I don't know what the final count would be, because I saw this movie a lot as a kid. So I can't really remember exactly what the number would be, but it's got to be at least 15 times I've seen The Shining, and I just absolutely love this movie. If I had to make a top 3 horror film list, it would definitely be Jaws, An American Werewolf in London, and The Shining. The Shining is a rare A-list, big-budget studio attempt at horror that really works. I mean, this is the guy who made Paths of Glory and Spartacus, making a movie about a guy with an axe in a hotel, and it's one of his best films. It's Kubrick trying to make something a little bit more commercial, best-selling novel and something, and he still manages to make something with groundbreaking visuals that you've never seen. Like, we didn't mention the use of the Steadicam in this movie, the technology only recently invented. So the inventor of the Steadicam, Garrett Morris, I can't remember, but he is carrying the Steadicam for those shots of throughout the hotel, and just creates an image, a style of horror or just of kinetic film that you just hadn't seen before. Up to that point, a haunted house movie with essentially 4 characters, 6 if you count those ghosts. Like we didn't even touch on Lloyd, one of my favorite characters, the best damn bartender from Timbuktu to Portland, Maine, or Portland, Oregon for that matter. And, well, it's just a tiny amount of characters, and yet it feels like an epic with the cinematography on display here. Not to mention the art direction, these massive, areas of the hotel. Like, it really is a horror movie by the crew that did Barry Lyndon. Such a great use of color in this movie, all these reds and oranges and burgundies that goes great with, the blood in the movie. Jack Nicholson giving one of his most entertaining performances, and that's really saying something. Here is Jack Torrance, going so beyond the point of over the top that, as Spielberg said, he didn't care for the movie originally. He said, Nicholson, it's almost more of a kabuki performance than a movie performance. But the main thing is he's just a joy to watch in every shot. As camp as Nicholson might be, Kubrick is not, so to speak. He makes this one of the most intense and frightening movies I've ever seen, still making me want to look away from the screen. Managing to be several kinds of horror in one movie. You have the supernatural element of the haunted hotel, which is scary enough, and then there's just that basic primal idea of your father coming at you and your mom with an axe, which is just in and of itself way more scary than, any kind of ghost. That same level of detail and intricacy that Kubrick put into his previous films like 2001 and Clockwork Orange is all over The Shining, and it really is one of his best. It depends on the day with me, really. If I just watched Dr. Strangelove, I'd say that's my favorite. And after watching The Shining, I feel the same way, which is that, again, it depends on when you ask me, but I often say The Shining is my favorite Stanley Kubrick film. And it's one of my all-time favorite films, and it's actual arts popcorn all the way.
Yeah, Kurt, I think you've summed it up excellent there. I'll only add a little bit more to this, going that this is not my favorite Kubrick film, but it's the one I've seen the most. And when we get to the end of this, we got 2 more to go. We'll do a final definitive ranking of all of them that we've reviewed here and run them down. But this one's definitely in the top 3. It's one of my favorite horror movies of all time. It's probably my favorite haunted house movie of all time. I mean, I have a real soft spot for House on Haunted Hill, the Vincent Price one, not the cheesy remake. Though that is kind of guilty pleasure fun, but the Vincent Price one's awesome. But this kind of movie, they just don't, I mean, now they get made a lot. Like The Conjuring has kind of brought this back, so thank you, James Wan and Blumhouse for bringing this back. But like Amityville Horror, the original one, and this one, they didn't make these movies like this for years, decades, because nobody wanted to try to redo this, and all of those movies nowadays, Annabelle and all that stuff, which I like a lot of those, borrow a lot from this and Amityville, and particularly this one. This one's infinitely better than the Amityville Horror. Amityville Horror kind of lives in sort of its own little pocket, and because there's an actual story to go along with it, and if you know anything about it, you kind of feel scummy for believing any of it. It's hard to access that one. This one is complete fiction, and it still totally works. And it works because it doesn't answer its own questions, even though Kubrick definitely had a vision, and this is what I think it is, but what do you think it is? And he was cool to let people sort of run with that. And, it's what makes this movie so much fun. And like I said earlier, this is one, after I watch it, I want to have a conversation with somebody about it. So I'm so glad I got to talk with you about this, because even though it is the 3rd time I've reviewed this on a podcast, I've seen a lot of different stuff. I've had a different take on it. And I'll be honest with you, I gave it a large popcorn way back when, and I think that was a fair rating then for what I was watching and reviewing it. But as a Kubrick film, this is extra large all the way. I mean, it's absolutely fabulous. It doesn't entirely work as a horror film for some reasons, and I think the Wendy character is a big sticking point for me. Like, I really don't like the performance there, even though I found some better things in it, and you've opened me up to it a little bit more. I still bump into that a little bit, so it's not perfect, but it's just as a film experience, just watching this unfold and how this is done in these big, wide open rooms. And you nailed it, Kurt. The thing about haunted house movies and scary movies is it's all about confinement, right? Well, this one's all about the openness of it. So it borrowed the open ocean part of Jaws and just made it, even more scary. And I love the idea of isolation as a terror point. And I think Kubrick's at his powers here. And, not to tip my hand completely, I don't think he ever got better than this again. I think this was another dip, back up to the mountain peak, and then the next two entries didn't quite work as well. And I think he chased this movie and trying to make it great for the rest of his life. And the joke was he was always cutting on it or whatever till the day he died. And it's probably true, I mean, he obsessed over this movie because I think he realized how good he could make it. And he took a good book and he made a great film out of it, and one that lasts the test of time. And so this is Extra Large Popcorn, and definitely one of the best things Kubrick ever did. And we're rounding the home corner here, Kurt. We got two movies left to go in the Kubrick retrospective. We got Full Metal Jacket and Eyes Wide Shut. Those will both be 2020 features, and then we'll have to find something interesting to do again for another ongoing series, because this one's gone on for several years, man, and it's been fun to do. But we're not done with you for December yet, though, man, because it's Star Wars time. We're going to wrap up for at least for the time being. Yeah, the Star Wars main, third trilogy here, right? We're going to get Episode 9 in just a couple weeks. The
idea is, an ongoing thing with Star Wars, but I think with the last two Star Wars movies, I think they're going to pump the brakes a little bit. So this is going to be a little different than Last Jedi, where it looks like, we're going to have a Star Wars movie every year. Episode 9 here, I think is going to be a little, hopefully it's going to be a little bit more special, because I think they are going to wait for a little bit and figure out what they want to do with Star Wars again. But yeah, I'm certainly looking forward to that.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be a lot of fun to jump back home with Nick and talk some Star Wars and end up what has been a fun 2019 to return here to Film Strip. And, folks, we can't thank you enough for your support. Kurt, tell folks how they can follow you on social media.
Well, you can find me on Facebook. I have the Facebook group, the Fabish Factor Film Group on Facebook, where we get into discussions very much like the ones we just had here on this podcast. You can find the Fabish Factor Film Podcast on iTunes and SoundCloud. One of these days I'll get back to pumping out some more episodes of that. And you can find my film reviews on Letterboxd. At the moment, I'm being challenged to watch a certain type of film, new films I hadn't seen before every month. The various styles this year, at the point of this recording, were foreign films, films made before 1959, films dealing with LGBT themes, films directed by women. And at the time of this recording, I'm going to be watching some 60s and 70s grindhouse films I hadn't seen before. But you can find those reviews on letterboxd.com.
Very cool. Folks, you can follow me on Twitter at @JSkipworth. You can also find more episodes like this one in the archives through the podcatcher feed of your choice. Go to our website, filmstrippodcast.com. You'll see everywhere that the podcast is available. And if you like the show, please leave a positive review wherever you listen to it. It helps other people find the show. Follow the show on Twitter at FilmStripPod. Or search Film Strip Podcast on Facebook. You can follow the episode post there and interact with many of the hosts. We certainly appreciate your support. So until next time, for Kurt, I'm Jay. You've always been listening to Film Strip.
Thank you for listening to Film Strip. You can find more episodes on our website, filmstrippodcast.com. The Film Strip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.